Okay, if I can have your attention, please. I was overhearing a nice conversation here in the front, so I had to get involved with it a little bit because I think it's indicative of the dilemma. This idea of building capacity, right, is interesting when you have limited people doing a particular piece of work. When you have limited numbers of coaches and you know that they are not focused exactly on what you think they should be focused on in order to make the big kind of change you want to make, the question was, should you just try it out with a few people and do like a pilot, or should you just like go for it? I, of course, said go for it, but let me tell you that there are two ways of doing change. I think you'll understand both of these allusions I'm going to make. One is the Tarzan way of doing change. And that way of doing change is, I obviously am not going to let go of the vine I have until I have the next vine in my hand, because if I do that, then I'm going to let go of the first vine before I have the next vine in my hand. I'm going to fall into the rainforest and kill myself. So why would I possibly do that? So I'm going to hold on to what I have, whether it works or not, until I have the next vine. That's the Tarzan theory of change. The next theory of change is called the Indiana Jones theory of change. And if you remember any of those movies, I hope that I'm not being a chauvinist citizen of the United States saying this to any of you, but those are pretty cool stories, I think. And the last story, he was on one side of this chasm. On the other side was the cave with the knight with the goblets, if you remember that in that Indiana Jones movie. And he remembered that he's supposed to take the leap of faith, and you see him pick his big boot up, and he takes the leap of faith. And sure enough, there's a bridge there, and he goes across the bridge over to the cave. That's the other theory of change. Take the leap of faith. Go for it. Because if you are making decisions based on the data, that's the way to make real change, because you're going to have ways of assessing whether or not your initial move was a good move, consistent with your collective moral purpose, if you use Fullen's lingo about this. So I think it is rare that it hurts to go for it if you're being responsible about it. You know, obviously you don't want to just kind of like go for it without any thinking about it, obviously, and planning, but that's the point. All right, let's move on to the next secret. The next secret is learning is the work. If you don't learn from failure, you fail to learn. Forgive and remember is the point that is being made by Pfeiffer in Fullen's book. I think that's an interesting point. What I think is weird is that when I worked for Covey, he always said, and I confronted him about this, that you should learn to forgive and forget. And I said, now wait a second, Steven, that can't be right, because you have that historical truth is that if you forget what happened in the past, you're likely to do it again. The reason why we pay attention appropriately to what happened in World War II with the Nazi Germany and the Holocaust is to try to avoid something like that ever happening again with that kind of genocide for any group of people. That notion makes sense to me, that you don't forget that. He said, yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what happens in organizations all the time. When there is a breach of trust, in order for the organization to move forward, you've got to learn to forgive that breach of trust if it's not some hugely significant thing, and then forget it. Move on. I think that's an interesting point to ponder about this. In the Toyota Corporation, here's what they look for trainers and coaches. And I know this is a little tainted, but take a look at what they say, because these 13 issues are not tainted. The idea is to hire and cultivate talented people to get things done. And notice what's being suggested that you need to be looking for. This might give you a hint, by the way, about your coaches in terms of what you need to build in terms of their capacity. Because notice that it isn't, this list was interesting to me because it didn't quite fit my existing paradigm about coaching. Because I'm so into relationship building that I thought anything that's other than relationship building doesn't matter. Well, of course it matters. Because you've got to pay attention to issues like persistence, and issues like confidence and leadership and observation and analytical ability, and job knowledge and respect for people in order to be able to get things accomplished. That's the issue that they're raising. So in the McKinsey & Company report that was recently done, and boy, I have a bookmark for this organization, McKinsey & Company. They have provided some of the best international data that I've ever seen. They said a generality that I didn't want to believe but I did believe after I read their analysis that all things taken into consideration, it's better to be a poor person living in Finland right now than it is being a poor person in the United States of America in terms of what's going on. So don't forget about all the, oh yeah, in the United States we're trying to deal with all this diversity and look at Finland. And no, what they did was they did an analysis that controlled for all those variables and found that it's better to be a poor person in Finland than in the United States. And I think that's true, unfortunately. But this is what they said the best school systems in the world do, according to the data. Now, in Finland, every time a person applies for a job as a teacher, there are 9 other people applying for every job. And what that means is that they're getting the top 30% of graduating classes from college to become teachers rather than the middle 30% or so that a lot of countries are getting to become teachers. So the teaching profession has been elevated in a big-time way in Finland. By the way, they're #1 in the world in terms of achievement right now. That's the reason why they're mentioned here. And you can see that more effectively, that ensure that instructors consistently deliver the best possible instruction. The best possible instruction for every child in the system. Early and targeted intervention. Okay? So that the idea is that you're not letting people get away with teaching in ways that are inconsistent with what we know works. I mean, seriously, did you know that it is not universal, that's not fair, I don't know that. It is a globally based finding that when teachers let kids know what the objective is at the beginning of a lesson, there's a greater likelihood of more kids achieving at a high level related to the objective. Is that like, you better write that down because it's really hard to remember that one. But it's like it's really good idea to let kids know where they're going up front, right? Here's another one. When you're going to ask a question to a particular student in the group who you think is a troublemaker, and so I want to ask you a question because I know you're a troublemaker and you've been causing trouble during the whole class. You never ask the question in the following way. Your first name is? Kathy. You never do this. Kathy, okay, so what is the provincial capital of Alberta? You never do that because you've lost everybody else when you say her name first. You always ask the question first. Then you pause for a while, let everyone get nervous, and then you call on Kathy because that way you've taken that opportunity to involve everyone. Why would we allow people not to practice that particular instructional act when it's a way of getting more kids involved? The big question I'd ask you about this whole morning is, are we willing to hold people accountable to what we know works? I'm giving a similar sort of a workshop in a couple of weeks in a big school district in Utah for their kind of end of the year kind of event that they're doing. And one of my breakout sessions is on using what we know. And I kind of went through several pieces of research literature and noticed that we have 40 years of this and 30 years of this and 20 years of this and 40 years of this that all points in one direction. Yet we are not holding ourselves accountable to 40 years of research called the effective schools literature. I don't know if that's true where you work, but think about that one if you would, because that's the important issue. So you can take a look at the rest of this. Here's the basic point that Fullen makes in all of his writing right now. Consistency and innovation have to come together. Consistency and innovation, as tough as that sounds, that needs to happen. I like that. Do you like that? This is an allusion to Tiger Woods. Do you remember him? He used to be a golfer before he lost his way. That's my addiction, is golf. And I always joke that I have 3 hobbies. Golf, cooking, and golf are my 3 hobbies. And I love it. But I think that he's an example of someone who might not ever now beat Jack Nicklaus's record for the most majors won, if you're a golfer. You know what I'm talking about. Because he played golf as if he was making his own rules. And then suddenly he found out, oops, I don't make my own rules anymore. I wonder what that means. Well, look what's happening right this second. It's not very pretty, right? Let's see what happens. So let me get to the end of this point. You can read through the message here. So the idea is to achieve consistency and innovation, and that only happens when there's consistent learning in context. And let me get to what that context is. And I'll get to the end of this right here. Yeah. I want to mention a school district that combines consistency with innovation. You want to do this, by the way, Canadian citizens, when it's February in Canada. You want to go to Fort Myers, Florida, where this school district is, to go visit. They like people to go visit. But it's important for you to remember that you're smart people and you'll go visit when it's January here and you want to go to Florida. That would be a good time to go to Florida, probably. This is a school district, though, that has 85,000 kids and 150 languages. And they have found a way to use RTI as the basis of their change that they're making, and they're getting great results. If you Google Lee County, Florida RTI, you will find the very best RTI manual that I think exists on the planet right now. It really is beautifully done. And you've got that website mentioned on the book list as well. But Lee County, Florida RTI. Larry Tian is the person in charge of this for the district. He's the director for curriculum and accountability. I brought 2 school districts down to visit him, and Larry gave us, in this chronological order, these Tianisms that he found was the real problem within his school system. So I just wrote them down chronologically, and I think they're helpful for me, at least. I hope they're helpful for you. They found out that one child or one teacher or one school at a time, that didn't work. That pilot stuff didn't work. They went from being a system of schools to being a school system. If you remember nothing else in this morning, that is the critical issue. The places in this world that are making something of RTI for the sake of student achievement are places that have become a system. Rather than being a system of schools, they're a school system. You know, that point I raised about the pay stubs and who you work for. That should matter. They found out that Tier 1 was the real problem they were having. Larry said a teacher is someone who helps a student learn something they couldn't have learned without the teacher. But then they quickly found that the teacher wasn't the problem. The problem was the system. When Peter Senge wrote his epic book in 1990 called The Fifth Discipline, he said structures create behaviors. If you want to change behavior, change structure. And that really does make some good sense, I think. And that's what they were talking about in Lee County as well. They came up with some non-negotiables at a district level. And that's become a popular phrase in the United States because of Marzano's work on district leadership. This idea of coming up with district level, school division level, non-negotiables. This is the way we're going to operate. So they decided in Lee County, teaching as a science is a non-negotiable. Teaching as an art is a negotiable. To suggest that teaching as an art is wrong. To suggest that teaching as a science is wrong. Teaching is an art and a science. Look at Marzano's book on the art and science of teaching, and you'll find some really good ideas in there. So common language makes sense, from constant change to continuous improvement. This last one is really important. Reducing variation and possible options, control variables, or they control you. In a lot of places in the United States, I don't know if it's true in Canada, if there are 50 schools within a school system, there are 50 different ways of dealing with the same problems the kids have that exist within that school division. Why? Why is that efficient or effective to do that? From a professional development perspective, it's not efficient or effective because you have to have such expertise school by school, back to your point about what you should do with these people. It's not going to work out of context, but if you were to create some standard protocols across your school division and then say this is all that these people will be doing is working on these standard protocols, that makes some sense. Now, without knowing it, I did that in state government with my staff who were dealing with kids with significant disabilities in Utah. We decided that we would apply for some money from the U.S. federal government that was a systems change grant for moving kids with significant disabilities back from their segregated settings back into the neighborhood school. That's what the systems change was about. When we got that, we began to see that it was working in the places that really wanted to go for that. And so we said to the school districts, if you want help in making your self-contained schools and self-contained settings work better, we'll tell you who to go to, but you're not going to get that help from the State Department. If you want help in moving your kids with significant disabilities back to their neighborhood schools, that's what we're here for. So we put our flag in the ground and said that the goal is to get as many kids as we possibly can back to their neighborhoods. Through the